Just testing the microphone. You guys can hear me? I hope Brian can hear me. I'll give you a wave.
We don't have enough people.
Good evening, and welcome to the Co-Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. I'm Ulrike McGregor, and I welcome you, all of you, tonight here in person and other attendees on the live stream for our second session of our reflections on Lent and the events of Easter through art. During our discussion of the artworks, please use the microphone that is available to ensure that everyone in the chapel, but also everyone on the live stream can hear you. And Amelia will help us guiding the microphone. So if you just wait for a second so she can catch up with you. I have chosen tonight's 3 works of art to highlight the upcoming solemnity of St. Joseph, which is celebrated next Wednesday on March the 19th. St. Joseph, the foster father of Jesus, was critically important in raising Jesus during the so-called hidden years. The paintings depict the role of Joseph as an attentive father, a teacher, and as a guardian of the Holy Family. Over the centuries, there has been a growing affection for the life and work of St. Joseph, declaring him the patron saint of engineers, architects, carpenters, and the universal church. This slide will help us to recognize into which artistic eras tonight's 3 works of art fall. Our first painting is entitled The Holy Family with the Little Bird. It was created during the Baroque era in circa 1650 by the Spanish artist Bartolomé Esteban Murillo. The work depicts the Holy Family in a domestic setting. Our second work tonight is the painting Joseph the Carpenter. It was painted just a few years earlier, between 1642 and 1644, by the French Baroque artist Georges de la Tour. Both of these paintings implemented chiaroscuro, an artistic technique that uses light and shadow to create a sense of richness and depth. Our last work of art of this evening, Christ Discovered in the Temple from 1642, is a lesser-known work by the important Sienese painter Simone Martini. This work is a gold-ground panel tempera as opposed to oil painting in the Gothic style. This rather charming painting was suggested to me by Father Mann a couple of months ago in association with a fabulous exhibition which is titled Siena, The Rise of Painting, 1600 to 1650, focusing on the, as I quote, exceptional moment at the dawn of the Italian Renaissance and the pivotal role of Sienese artists, which was then at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and it now has moved on to the National Gallery in London, and it's open until June 22nd. This work, Christ Discovered in the Temple, is the backdrop for a brief introduction into the creation of gold-ground panel paintings, which refer to religious paintings made on gold leaf-covered panels of wood between the second half of the 13th century and the early 15th century. Wood panels was the support for most of paintings before canvas replaced it at the end of 1500s. The first step in the creation of an egg tempera panel is to prepare the panel's ground layer. This is done by repeatedly coating the wood with gesso. Gesso is Italian for gypsum, a calcium sulfate. This process is time-consuming, but critical to ensure that the pigments and the gold leaf will adhere and last without cracking. Then over here, a needle is used to incise the outline of the figures to create a fixed border between the painted surfaces and the gilded background. Over here, bole, a Greek word meaning earth, is a soft reddish-brown clay which is mixed with glue It is used to create a rich brown and warm ground below the gold leaf. Water gilding is the method when the dried bowl is moistened with water to reactivate the glue, and the gold leaf is dropped into place. And gold leaf is really, really thin. I don't know if you have had the experience with it. So it's made out of gold coins, and they were hammered to, I don't know what the micrometers would be, but it is really, really thin, and it's very delicate. So it's quite an experience to work with gold leaf and to get it into place where you want it to go on your work of art. The next step is burnishing the gold leaf. It is an important step to make the gold leaf brilliant. Burnishing is what gives the metallic surface its characteristic gleam. The gold leaf was burnished with dog or wolf's tooth. These days, a polished agate stone is used. The gold leaf can then be decorated with ornamental lines and punch marks. And we can see a wonderful example of the punch marks in our last work of art later today. After the gold leaf is in place and burnished, the paint is applied to the areas where the figures are to be painted. First, terra verte, a green earth, is a soft green hue, was commonly used from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance. It was used as an underpainting, providing the base for warmer skin tones of any to-be visible flesh. Artists would then paint a thin layer of pinkish-white paint over the terra verte. And there's an example of this over here. It's a painting, an unfinished painting by Michelangelo. And we can see where the artist laid down the green earth, and then the face would, or the skin color would lay on top of it. Unfortunately, the red pigments in the pinkish-white paint were less stable and faded faster, revealing the green underpaintings underneath. And this is an example over here. The painting by Duccio is the Maesta. And quite often you probably have wondered as you walked into a museum and you looked at old Middle Age paintings from the Middle Ages, why their faces were green. And that's the reason, because the artist used this underpaint, which is green, and then put a light layer of like a pinkish color on top of it. But the color got degraded much faster, and then so you see and some people call it the seasick angels or seasick saints in many of the gold leaf paintings. And then lastly, color pigments were then mixed with egg yolk, which binds the colored pigments to the prepared wooden panel. The addition of small amounts of water would thin the paint and result in the desired transparency. Egg tempera was applied in many very thin glazes. It dries quickly and cannot be blended as compared to oil paint. Egg tempera remained the principal medium for over 1,000 years until oil paints became available during the 15th century. Following this brief introduction into gold-ground panel paintings, I will now turn to the works of art of this evening. Our first work of art, The Holy Family with a Little Bird, painted by the leading Spanish Baroque artist Bartolomé Esteban Murillo, circa 1650, invites us to contemplate the significance of a father figure or guardian in raising a young child. Joseph Jesus' foster father, is an important role model in this critical period of the growing Christ child. And as I introduce the artist, you can follow along on the handout. Murillo was born in Seville, Spain, in 1617. He was known as the greatest religious painter of his age. He would live and work in Seville his entire life and was a major artist of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. During his childhood, Seville remained the foremost city in Spain, equal in power and population to Venice, Amsterdam, or even Madrid. Seville had long held the monopoly of trade with the New World, and despite Spain's near constant war with France and the Low Countries, the city remained prosperous well into the 1630s. But by the early 1650s, however, Seville, although still seen as Spain's cosmopolitan and intellectual center, was no longer a commercial powerhouse. The city had lost its trade monopoly to the port city of Cadiz. Almost half of Seville's population was wiped out in the plague of 1647 to 1652. A catastrophe followed by famine, recession, and further trade disruption. Partly in reaction to the economic disintegration, Seville's religious orders, the Franciscans, Dominicans, and Capuchins, dedicated their considerable resources towards charity and commissioning artworks to both give hope to the populace and artistically reinforce the Counter-Reformation. Murillo, who was deeply devout, shaped his life and career on service to the Catholic Church and its fraternities, many of which are still active today. Unlike somewhat earlier generation of master Spanish painters, including Diego de Velázquez, Francesco de Zuberan, and Alonso Cano, Murillo did not aspire to royal patronage. His connections to Seville aristocracy and religious brotherhoods were enough to facilitate a flow of commissions. Murillo also painted sensitive portraits of the local street life in Seville that offered an alternative strand to his impressive religious oeuvre. He died aged 65 in 1682, resulting from a fall from scaffolding while painting a fresco in the Capuchin church in Cadiz. Now, I would like to quote from Pope Leo XIII, and he says, "In Joseph, heads of the household are blessed with the unsurpassed model of fatherly watchfulness and care." And now I would like to start to explore this painting together with you. And kind of start usually with what do we see? Who are the figures? I hope you can see it well enough, just even it's quite light tonight. And we might even move this over just a little bit.
So I actually see a dog and not a bird.
Yes.
Where's the bird?
Yeah. So the bird, and there you go. It's right there. Can you see it a little bit better? Yeah. So yes, Jesus is holding a bird, and then so the bird is in his hand up here, and then we have a dog down here. And yeah, we can also, again, we can maybe walk from the left to the right just to explore the painting, and then determine kind of what's the center of the painting. So unusual for for the Holy Family, who's rather in the back? Yeah, so in this painting, the Virgin Mary is rather set back. And then if you walk towards here, we could divide the painting into three parts. So in this part, we have the Virgin Mary sitting in the back. In the middle part, we have St. Joseph with the Christ child. And then over here, again, unfortunately, it's not dark enough. We have the workbench of Joseph.
This is a very simple observation. I'm very struck by how much Joseph and Mary look alike. With the eyebrows and the face, it's quite interesting.
Interesting observation. Thank you.
They say that happens if you live together long enough. I'm just struck by the kind of playful, mischievous look on Jesus' face. That of a little toddler, and his dad kind of, the dad probably enjoying that a little more than what mom is.
Yes, exactly. So, and I think that's what the painting would like to celebrate. It likes to celebrate so the play and the presence of the Father with the child. Yeah, Michael.
And Joseph has his right hand on Jesus. He's holding him, keeping him from falling or whatever, or preventing him from dipping the bird down where the dog might snatch it or something. But he is gesturing to either to the dog to come up and see the bird, or to Jesus to let that dog have a closer look. So he's kind of an intermediary of some kind, trying to guide the situation so it doesn't get out of hand. Mm-hmm. Which is what fathers often have to do with little kids.
Yes, yeah. So I think absolutely we can see this painting as a playful depiction of family life, and I think that's very much what Murillo wanted to do in the first instance.
I hate to be a contrarian, but you see a very steep diagonal from the dog to Jesus to Joseph, which usually what leads you into one of these paintings. And I don't see the difference in, obviously your identity is your face, and the way he treats Joseph's face is pretty equal to what he's treating Mary's face. So I think obviously the center is Jesus, and he doesn't have a halo, but he's certainly all in white. And the only other thing that's all in white is the what he's looking at, the dog. You wouldn't say the dog's more important because he's obviously in more light than Mary and Joseph. But I would say the importance of this is Jesus. I don't see the Joseph over Mary here. That's just me.
Okay, interesting. I mean, certainly, of
Otherwise,
course,
the dog is more important than both.
I
don't think that's it.
Jesus is the center of. Right, but so if, and I did that at home, so you do a complete diversion of the painting, and Jesus Christ is in the middle, and but then it's what does it mean? Jesus should be the center of our family. Jesus should be the center of our family life. I fully agree with that.
And all three of the other figures have their eye on Jesus. Joseph is looking down at Jesus, Mary is observing Jesus, and the dog is looking up at Jesus. So.
Right. So yes. So we have the dog, and the dog is a symbol of loyalty or innocence. And I think that's why the dog was brought in. He looks at Jesus. The Father looks, but that it's an interesting view. I do think that Murillo wanted to celebrate Joseph a little bit more and pulled him more into the center of the painting. Not to minimize the Virgin Mary, but I think his intent was to give Joseph the recognition that Joseph had received over the last few hundred years. It started in the 1800s, that popes particularly, and also the general public, started to be more devoted to, had a devotion to St. Joseph. And we see that throughout the centuries, Joseph had been pulled in forward a little bit more and more. I mean, so he was declared the saint, the patron saint of the Universal Church. Then he has been brought into the Eucharistic prayer, and he's mentioned right after the Virgin Mary. So he really has come up throughout the centuries, devoting. Excuse me? Also, well, the Reformation started with Martin Luther. And then the church wanted to counter that, and particular works by Caravaggio were commissioned to create a visual, to visualize the stories in the Bible for the people that couldn't read the Bible. So, because remember, a lot of people were illiterate at that point, and they would come to the church, and many times, exclusively, I would say, the service was in Latin anyway, and the general public wasn't familiar with that. So, and we also remember we were in Mannerism around that time, and Mannerism paintings were very obscure, actually. The colors were odd, the figures were odd. It was very hard to read those paintings. So with the Counter-Reformation, it was, the church wanted to, or asked artists and commissioned works of art that were legible for the general public.
Just a side note, there was more devotion to Joseph in Spain than in much of Europe. For example, Teresa of Avila named her first monastery after St. Joseph. It was dedicated to Joseph. So that was kind of a Spanish thing, and this may be playing into that. So.
Yes, I think so, absolutely. And I think they have even parades on St. Joseph's Day in particular cities in Spain, and they have a particular food that they make. I forgot the name of it, but yeah.
I just can't let it go by mentioning Mary, and that she's not in blue, and she's sitting near a laundry basket, it looks to me.
I think she's
Yep.
spinning, isn't she?
I don't know what she's
looks
holding.
Like loose wool to me in the basket, but
It looks like an apple to me, too.
Yes.
So I don't know what she's holding, but just interesting to see her in a different light than how we normally see her in all the other portraits where she's.
they don't show her doing housekeeping
Yeah, thank
very
you,
much,
thank you,
know?
Vicky. Actually, I was hoping someone would bring it up. Yes, I mean, first of all, so just to back up a little bit, Murillo, he worked in the style of Caravaggio, so he used strong lights. So it kind of you can have like a spotlight coming from the front, and the Christ child is bathed in light, and everything else is kind of more in the background or in darkness. I mean, it's not dark, but darker. So, and then to bring that across, his color palette was rather muted. So we don't have the brilliant blues or oranges or greens. However, and again, it's unfortunately hard to see. So even though her cloak or the clothes she's wearing is not blue, if you go online and have a really good look at the painting, this is at the Prado, she has like a scarf or something over her lap that has a blue tone in it. So again, to signify her as the Virgin Mary. But yes, I love that. And coming, because I think this is really neat. So first of all, yes, she is doing housework. Again, I think it's to that theme of family life, celebrating family life, but also celebrating work, because work was very, very important in this time. And today too, I think we sometimes underestimate it, or labor work is very, very important. It's not diminished, and certainly it's celebrated in the painting here. So she's doing manual labor, and then the basket, I think it's really nice, even though I said he used a very limited color palette, but I thought this is really beautiful. So everything is white. It's her sewing fabrics, and everything is white, but there's a little bit of red in there as a marker of foreshadowing the passion of Jesus Christ. So, sorry, I didn't.
When you look at Joseph, who is known as a protector, I think he's teaching Jesus about protecting the vulnerable in that bird, and yet he's also recognizing the nature of the dog, and those are kind of complex things to do as a protector, to teach those things.
Yes. Yeah, I think you kind of finding the balance between things, maybe. Yes. Yeah. And I think the bird, just to kind of, some might be familiar with that. Birds are quite often, you find birds quite often in religious paintings. Like the typical one would be a dove, a sign of for the Holy Spirit. Here it is not quite clear. Quite often we see, particularly the Christ child, holding a goldfinch. And there's a beautiful story. The goldfinch has a little bit of red around his face, the plume. And a goldfinch like to feed on thistles and on thorn bushes. And so the story goes that on his way to Calvary, and Jesus was wearing his thorn crown, that a goldfinch came down and plucked one of the thorns, and the blood of Jesus Christ kind of splashed into the face of the goldfinch, and that is kind of as his mark for going forward. The goldfinch would have the red plume. There's another story about supposedly the Christ child was playing with clay birds that friends had given him, and he had made them come to life. So as a sign of his resurrection, kind of a play on that. So that's, as you go into the museum, I would quite often do that with Amelia when she was smaller. It's kind of, if you look at paintings like this, for a child it gets boring quite quickly. But I would always send her out and have her look at the paintings, and she had to point out all the animals. So you're actually quite surprised how many animals, dogs or birds or other animals you will find in a painting. One quick thing also, we commented on Joseph's face a little bit. There is no, so the Bible doesn't give us the age of Joseph. And there is also, there's no consensus. Some people believe he was older, but there's not necessarily any proof of that. And so as we go through these three paintings, I just would like you to keep an eye on it, how the different artists chose to depict Joseph. In this painting, Murilo chose to depict Joseph as a younger man, as a young father. But I think that will change. Yes. Any other thoughts or comments? Otherwise, those were the points that I wanted to discuss with you on this painting. And I will leave you with this question. As Joseph did at the request of the angel to take on the pregnant Mary, do we step up and support others, especially young people that find themselves in a difficult situation? Our second painting tonight is an equally intimate and contemplative painting. It is entitled Joseph the Carpenter, painted circa 1642 to 1644 by the French Baroque painter Georges de Latour. And again, I will just introduce his work and his accomplishments. Georges de Latour was born in 1593 in Vie-sur-Seille, a town in the independent Duchy of Lorraine in northeast France. His family belonged to the provincial arts class. Both his father and his grandfather were bakers. There's little documentation about his artistic training or early career. Latour, as well as Murillo, as we just saw in the painting, was heavily influenced by the work of Caravaggio, who had died in 1610, when Latour was a young artist. Latour is best known as a religious and genre painter with devotional scenes depicting deep contemplation in an intense spirituality, structured by dramatic effects of daylight and candlelight. After the unveiling of Caravaggio's first public commission in 1600, artists from across Europe flocked to Rome to see his work. Caravaggio's international reputation spread quickly thanks to the numerous French, Dutch, and Flemish artists in Rome who disseminated his style across Europe. The increasing demand for paintings by Caravaggio and his followers contributed to the rise of the Caravaggesque movement. Artists who produced works in a naturalistic vein with dramatic chiaroscuro, an artistic technique that uses light and shadow to create deep depth behind the subject, often treating subjects that Caravaggio himself had made popular. However, of note, Caravaggio never painted a picture with a candle in it, yet his name is often associated with candlelight scenes. Latour, whose knowledge of Caravaggio was most likely indirect, took the genre to a new level of sophistication and refinement. As well as chiaroscuro, Latour used careful geometric compositions and simplified paintings of forms. During his career, his work displayed different qualities from Caravaggio, moving towards greater simplicity and stillness. Latour's religious paintings omitted Caravaggio's dramatic effects. Latour often created very quiet and intimate moments, leaving large expanses of the canvas empty. His surviving output is relatively small, despite often painting several variations on the same subjects. After his death at Lunéville in 1652, 2 weeks after the death of his wife, and both of their lives was probably taken by an epidemic, Latour's work was forgotten until it was rediscovered in the 1910s. And as you consider tonight's second painting, I would like to quote from Pope John Paul II. Saint Joseph was a carpenter, and through his work of manual labor, Joseph provided for the Holy Family and shared in the divine plan of salvation. And I invite any thoughts on this? Again, who are the figures?
I love how the light is coming through Jesus' fingers and how hard that must have been to paint, and the youthfulness of his face and underneath his chin. I just think that is just so beautiful. I love it.
Yes, well, thank you.
I'm reminded of when my dad was remodeling our basement when my brother and I were young, and he would occasionally ask for our help, and that he was very precise. And so, like, just trying to make sure you're holding the candle in the right place. Jesus has got that look on his face. I can relate to that look.
That's nice. Yes, so let's work with that, absolutely. So again, we have a painting that uses chiaroscuro. Again, we're becoming familiar with this. So one strong light source. And in this painting, yes, it is the candle. We can just see a little bit of the Christ child is holding it, and the flame is just right behind here. And it kind of shoots up a little bit. I have to say, de la Tour painted many paintings with candles in it, and they usually look very natural. They tend to have a long flame, but this looks a little bit odd. I'm just taking this away because I know probably someone was going to ask me about it. It is, I don't know why he kind of created quite such an elongated flame. So the light source in it, yes, it illuminates Jesus's face so directly, and I think it kind of, again, it's symbolically, it's not just the candlelight, but it's also probably Jesus's face that radiates the light and illuminates just the space right around where they are working. And I kind of have this.
I just marvel at Jesus' hand. It's almost like it's, you can see right through it.
Yes, yes.
And it's just, and then the delicacy of the shirt that is on St. Joseph and how it's all tied up in here on the upper part of his arms to get it out of the way.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's so much sensitivity in such little things
Yes.
that it's amazing.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. That's beautiful, and that's a main point of the painting, the hand of Jesus. That it's natural if we would hold a light really close to our hands, that we could see the kind of a reddish tone. But I think he pushes that a little bit further because he wants to depict the truly human and the truly divine of Jesus Christ. So yes, his hands are divinely see-through. So I think very much de la Tour worked on this constantly, depicting things naturalistically, but not forgetting the symbolism in his paintings. And I loved also, to coming back to you, so it's the wonderful contrast also of the two faces. It's the Christ child with its very smooth, youthful skin, and then we see the wrinkles and the older face and the facial expressions of, in this case, an older Joseph. So de la Tour chose to depict St. Joseph as an older man. But I think that's a beautiful contrast between the two figures. And I just wanted to direct our attention towards the lower part of the painting as well. Any comments before I kind of jump in there?
Thank you for expanding this section, because I was wondering, who the heck's leg is that? Because if that's Jesus's, he's going to be one tall string bean. It looks like. That looks like an adult leg, size-wise, even though it doesn't have the hair that Joseph's leg does.
Yeah. So these are the feet of Jesus Christ, And then, so this is the foot of Joseph standing on a beam, a wooden beam, and he's using is it an auger? Yeah, and that's in the shape of a cross. Again, bringing in the symbolism, the foreshadowing of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and also using the wooden beam, I think, again, plays on that. One detailed, or two details that because here now we can see the hands of Jesus Christ again, which are so kind of see-through, and then in contrast, the beautiful, hardworking hands and the large hands of St. Joseph. So those are real working hands. They're hands that are used for labor. And then the other detail, I just think it's so neat. They're matchy-matchy in terms of their sandals. That's just kind of just a neat detail. It doesn't mean anything, but I thought that was just a beautiful little detail. Yep.
I'm a little confused about the candle. I mean, it's pretty tall, and is it what were candles made of in those days? I mean, tall and looks like it could burn Joseph's forehead at any moment.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe it was something that wasn't so hot. Was it really a candle? And Jesus' fingers, you know, part of the candle's right behind the fingers, so you can see the light coming through between the fingers. So any clue about what sort of candle that might be?
So I think it is a regular candle. I was mentioning, I'm not sure why de la Tour painted it quite so tall. I should have brought in some other paintings as a comparison. He was usually very good in realistically painting a candle and the flame. This one does look a bit odd because it's so stretched, so long. I think, again, the symbolism of this is, so Jesus is fully illuminated with the light of the candle, and he kind of radiates it out. Some people think that, for example, this could be a moment of Joseph's spiritual awakening. We see the light of the candle kind of falling onto his forehead. And he also has his eyes, and it's again hard to see on this one, his eyes, he's actually not looking down at his work, he's kind of looking at Jesus Christ. And it looks like Jesus is speaking to Joseph. So they're certainly in a conversation. And some people, some other art historians, have interpreted that maybe Jesus Christ has revealed his future, or his further future, to Joseph. So that's not my interpretation. That's kind of what I've understood by others. But it is it's a very intimate. If we kind of pulling this back a little bit for a moment, it's a very intimate scene, isn't it? It's beautiful. It's quiet. It's just the two of them. And then if we just think of a father and a child, or a caregiver, or a neighbor working with the neighbor's kid, it's so nice, and it's something that we are maybe have lost a little bit. I think it's for an adult to sit with a child and teaching them something and having meaningful conversations. I think that's also kind of the message of this painting. And it's just, what I find quite interesting, so this painting is from the 17th century, but it also could be a much more modern painting, I would say, because of its simplicity and the clear lines. So it is certainly a much more timeless painting than many others that we've seen from the Baroque era. So yeah, to give our last painting equal amounts of time, I will leave you with the following question. Do we allow for quieter moments, as we see in this painting, with the children in our lives? The third and last work of art of this evening is a gold-ground panel tempera painting entitled Christ Discovered in the Temple, created and signed in 1342 by one of the leading artists of Siena, Italy in the 14th century, Simone Martini. Simone Martini was born in Siena probably in 1284. Very little is known about Simone's artistic education, but it is believed that he was a pupil of Duccio, one of the greatest Italian painters of the Middle Ages. Simone worked predominantly in the Gothic painting style and had a significant influence on the spread of Sienese painting through Europe. At the beginning of the 1300s, Siena was at the forefront of artistic innovation and achievements. While not a port or river city, Siena was located on a main thoroughfare known as the Via Francigena. This route, which ran from Rome to European cities north of the Alps, I think it all actually goes all the way to Canterbury in Great Britain, brought a stream of portable objects from France and other artistic centers through the city gates, stimulating economic activity and artistic imagination. The beginning of the 14th century was a period of peace and prosperity in Siena, often described as a golden age. Artists, especially painters, transformed Siena, expanding their art to its limits to create both large decorative schemes for civic and religious buildings and refined small-scale paintings that were collected and admired far beyond the city walls. The earliest surviving work by Simone was his commission to paint the Maestà fresco in the Sienese seat of government, the Palazzo Pubblico, signed and dated 1315. In the following years, Simone also received commissions for many paintings and frescoes outside Siena, such as in Naples, Pisa, Assisi, or other cities. In the late 1330s, at the height of his career, Simone abandoned his successful practice in Siena and moved to Avignon in France. Avignon had become the new papal court in 1309, following escalating conflicts between the Italian papacy and French crown. This dispute had resulted in the election of a French pope, and ultimately the papal court's relocation from Rome to Avignon. And that lasted from 1309 to 1377, and there had been 7 popes during that period of time. And I think they were all French, so not so sure how that represented the rest of Europe. But Christ's discovery in the temple was painted in 1342. In June 1344, Simone made his will shortly before his death in Avignon. His wife and daughter returned to Siena, where they died of the plague along with countless others in the city. I think we have heard this actually now a couple of times. The plague was very active throughout Europe, throughout the Middle Ages, really into the 17th, 18th century, and had wiped out millions and millions of people. For this work of art, I would like to quote from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verses 48 and 49, which will be here on the solemnity of St. Joseph. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been looking for you with great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" And Now I'm curious how you feel about this painting. Just to kind of connect this back to our introduction. So yes, we have a beautiful gold ground panel painting. So this is, most of the time they used poplar wood, so wood from poplars. And then so they had to go through all these different stages that we had discussed in the introduction.
Obviously, this was much earlier, but from the painting before the Latour, what I found most interesting about the Latour is the strength in Joseph, the muscles in his arms, that here is this very, very strong man, and yet on the almost translucence of Christ, which overpowers that. And that's why I think they say this is when he discovered spirituality, or not discovered it, but was, I don't know, touched by it. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the power of the child over the strength of human nature. And yet in this one, where the readings are saying, a very kind of self-confident young Jesus saying, well, why didn't you, very discounting his parents' fears. It's sort of the opposite of the, the Latour. And I don't know if that's because of the centuries or just the way it's depicted.
Mm-hmm. I think definitely it's a very unusual depiction. Even just the composition and the layout of the painting is just very unusual. If we kind of go back to this. And also the theme of this is rather unusual, because if artists would choose the part in the Bible where Jesus is left behind in the temple, quite often an artist would have chosen the moment where Jesus is sitting with the other teachers and he's teaching them. So this is now just a couple hours later, and it's just very unusual. And yes, I mean, Jesus kind of steals the show a little bit with his rather adolescence moodiness, but I think.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that he's got his arms crossed and he looks a little resentful, and Joseph is like, well, listen to your mother, and his mother is talking to him saying, didn't you realize what? Anyway, but what really strikes me first is the opulence of their dress, especially compared to the one where Jesus and Joseph are working. That's all these taupe and brown, and which is the dress of the poor. Brown was the cheapest dye to use on wool, so that's what most poor people wore.
Mm-hmm.
But these guys are resplendent with their gold embroidered borders and all that, so it's
I think
probably not very realistic.
Right, I think that's because, again, we would, even though this is smaller, it might have been a piece for personal devotion, but many times, particularly in the 14th century, if you think of altar pieces, and they all would use the gold ground and then paint in with the tempera. And very rarely one would come so close to these paintings. So I think that's certainly a reason why an artist would have chosen very strong colors. And again, think back, it was all lit by candles. So it's actually a beautiful effect. If you would imagine there's no light in this room. Churches were very dark at that point, and everything was lit by candles. And so the light would dance on the gold, and then highlight the colors, just for people to be able to see it also from a greater distance.
When I first saw it, I thought, she's the boss. Mary's the boss. And I felt like it's a very emotional.
Yeah.
The Joseph, Jesus, and Mary is a bit stoic, but she's the boss.
I find it very icon-like. There's an element that just I can see in the colors, in the richness, and in the ability to see into the eyes of each one that's in the picture.
Mm-hmm. Sure, again, because it does come out of this time that we had the Byzantine period just before, and the icons very much were the main way of presenting Jesus Christ, or the the Virgin Mary together with Christ. I think that definitely leans still onto the Byzantine art at that time. Definitely, yes. Yeah, it is twofold. Again, I think all the paintings we have seen tonight there's a little bit of a twofold. It's the initial impression is, it's the Holy Family, but they're just like us, right? This child misbehaved. St. Joseph is rather upset with him, but that he caused pain to his mother. I mean, I think that's really what he was mostly concerned, because he points his right hand over to his mother. And as you say, she's rather also kind of probably disappointed, but also still she reaches out with her hand, her right hand. So I think this is the first layer of the painting, to understand or see the Holy Family as a family, and as a normal family, and they are going through these phases when Jesus Christ is growing up. And then I think we have seen the progression throughout these three paintings: Jesus as a toddler, or as just a 3 or 4 year old, then maybe 6, 7, and then here he was 14 when he was left in the temple. But I think this painting does also call us to think beyond that a little bit. And Jesus is becoming an adolescent. He obviously always was fully aware of his role that he had to play and the mission he had to fulfill. And so I think he is kind of stepping into that a little bit, and is a little bit more assertive in which he says, because he also could ask, why are you worried? You know what I have to do. And obviously it's maybe hard to really see that, because they also had, during the hidden lives, I mean, one could imagine they also had a normal life in some way, but always with the underpinning of what his real call was for the later life. Gentlemen?
When I look at the picture, I'm struck by, I'd say, 3 different things. One is how crabby Jesus looks because he was interrupted or stopped from doing what he wanted to. The second thing is how their circles around their head are different, and Jesus is different than the other 2. But then there's no real background or anything, and they have that circular structures behind the people. And does that have any significance? Mm-hmm. With the background? There's no painting of a room or anything, but you have I don't know, is that like an arch, or I don't know what that's supposed to represent? Right.
Yes. So again, thank you for pointing out. So these are the halos. In different periods of art history, artists would use halos to represent Jesus Christ or the Virgin Mary or any saints, to kind of mark them and say, okay, this is an important person. And it is true, and it's absolutely beautiful. Earlier in the introduction, I mentioned that once the gold leaf was burnished, then the artist would use different tools to further highlight the halos or further put in little patterns. And it's true, each of the halos has a slightly different pattern. So the artist, and it's usually a team. So if you think of the different steps I walked you through to make these panel paintings, it wasn't just one artist. It was a group of artists, because it was a carpenter working on the wood. Someone else would do the gesso, putting it on and smoothing it out. And then you had specialists that would work with the gold leaf, and that were really good at it. So again, it kind of comes together as a team, but whoever was in charge of the gold leaf and the decoration did a beautiful job. It's absolutely gorgeous. Yes, in the background, you have that quite often. Mary was saying with icons, you rarely have a proper setting, just to make it timeless and also independent of a particular, like a church or so. It's just makes it easier accessible, because you're also not distracted from a background that's there. And also with the gold leaf, there's just so much detail you could then work into the painting.
I find it interesting that there is a book in Mary's lap, presumably a prayer book, but she would not have been literate in her time frame of life.
Oh well, Mary, the Virgin Mary, she as a young girl, she had been given to the priests. So actually, Mary herself was probably literate, and in all the Annunciations, she's always depicted holding a book for multiple reasons. I mean, to referring to the Old Testament, where the birth of Jesus Christ had been foretold, and also that she was. So there's multiple, but I think she would probably one of the very few that potentially might have been literate. Yeah.
This is just a technical question. The pigments don't seem faded on this one? Or am I not seeing that right? I mean, the red's pretty vivid, the purple is, and the blue.
So I do think in the face we do see the bit of the greenish coming through. So particularly in Joseph's face and Mary, not so much on Christ's face. Some of the colors have fainted a little bit. The good thing is with the blue, it's ultramarine, and that's first of all a very expensive pigment, one of the most expensive pigments besides purple actually, that artists could use, and luckily it was very stable. So again, if you would go through a museum, you would quite often the blue still would be very vibrant, and everything else kind of would have been washed out a little bit. Yes, it's kind of interesting. So they all have a bit of the red as the symbolizing the passion of Christ, the blood of Christ. Mary's very typical with the heavenly blue in her robe. Kind of Jesus echoes that. And I actually thought, so it's quite interesting. Joseph wears a purple robe, and purple was the color usually for royals, but also for powerful or the head of the household. And I think that color, they kind of probably chose that to signify that, at least that he was the head of the household in the family. So we're actually running way over time here. Just to finish this up, to pull this together, I will leave you with my question. Do we allow for the development of independence with the children in our lives? And thank you very much for coming, and good to see you.